Next, we're going to hear from Executive Director and co-founder of Energy Justice Network, Mike Ewall, who's also an Esquire attorney.
I always shy away from the Esquire thing. People hear that you're a lawyer and they assume you know everything about every area of law in every state, and they assume that you do lawyering all the time. And I'm like, no, definitely not. So yeah, I'm an activist first and a lawyer tools in my back pocket more recently, but that's not what defines me. So that's cool. It's cool. It's just, yeah, dispelling perceptions. So I've been using local ordinances to help stop polluters throughout Pennsylvania since I was in undergrad about 20 years ago. And I was only a lawyer in the past 4 years. So you don't have to be a lawyer to do this. It just helps, but you don't have to be. So there are two paths that a lot of groups go down. One is how to lose and one is how to win. I want to go through how to lose first because a lot of folks are good at that, and I want to let you know what not to do. So the way that how to lose usually looks is you get involved and you see this company's trying to build something that you don't want, and you understand that there are hearings and technical processes and whatnot, and you're like, okay, well, those are the hoops we're supposed to jump through. We're supposed to go to this meeting and give some comments and turn a lot of people out, and then have the public officials ignore our comments and then issue a permit anyway. And then we're supposed to raise a lot of money and have a lot of bake sales so we can hire lawyers so we can appeal those permits. And then you basically take the fight out of the community when you do that, because everyone in the group is like, well, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert, why do they need me? And they figure that, they assume falsely that lawyers all fire silver bullets and can take down anything, and therefore just because you have a lawyer, that means that you have a chance of winning, or that anything like that is possible. So people in the group fall asleep and they're like, well, I'm not a lawyer, they don't need me. And then when your group falls asleep, you lose your ability to fundraise to feed those experts in the first place, and then you just lose. And that happens over and over and over again, and I hate that. And I'm like, I was once, like back in '94, there was a workshop on how to win without lawyers, and it was taught by a lawyer. I'm like, that is awesome. And I'm always like teaching people like how to win without lawyers. Now that I can get to be a lawyer, I can say as a lawyer, like, don't use lawyers. There are strategic ways to use them, but you don't have to. So the important thing is to recognize that if you let the fight come out of the community by keeping the fight in a technical, legal realm, then you've already given up your best chance of winning. The rules by which permits are granted are written by the polluters and adopted by governments in order to enable these bad things that we don't like to exist. And even though sometimes we can find those, we're going to put out 0.1 parts per million instead of 0.08 parts per million of that thing, and we're going to fight over that difference, and maybe you'll win and be a little less polluting, and maybe you'll find a silver bullet somewhere and knock a thing out of the park. But for the most part, if groups win through that strategy, it's not because you won the appeal. It's because you've dragged it out long enough that the investors gave up and went somewhere else. And so sometimes you win just by slowing things down, like the previous speakers were talking about, but that's the very expensive way of doing this. So there are two ways to win, fundamentally. One is that you do what I just said. You do the expensive route, you go hire the experts, take the fight out of the community, and if you're lucky, you'll just delay it enough that they give up. But that doesn't always work that way. So the best way to win really is to keep the fight in the community, to keep it as locally focused. Now in Pennsylvania, we're blessed. I mean, we got a lot of corruption, and we're one of the most corrupt states. We got a lot of problems in the state, but compared to a lot of states, we're blessed in the fact that we have local governments everywhere. There's not a single inch of Pennsylvania that doesn't have a municipal government as well as a county government. Some states just have counties, and they have to organize a whole county's worth of people to affect their local government. Here we can just focus on our townships and boroughs and cities, and we can get a lot further because we don't have to organize as many people to take over local government or influence something. So there are a lot of ways you can win at the local government level, and we're going to focus on ordinances in this, but zoning approaches and there are other ways can also make a difference. So So I kind of went through this already, but yeah, smaller levels of government are always the ones that are more easily influenced. And so when we're talking about like fighting FERC, I'm just like, are you nuts? Like, this is not only a federal agency, but this is like one of the worst federal agencies there is. It's like trying to stop a nuclear reactor with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. You might as well just beat your head against a brick wall if you want to like show you have a bloody forehead and feel good about yourself. But that's about as far as we're going to get. So the fact that we can focus at the local level where people power is much more effective. So yeah, keeping things political is really important because what brings these projects in is money and politics. And what takes them out is money and politics. Our strength is that we have truth, and with that truth on our side, we can get people, and we can use people power to fight money power. But if you're fighting lawyers with lawyers and fighting in the realm that they want you to fight, you're fighting money power with money power, and they always have more money. So you need to fight money power with people power and keep it political. Even though we do have the science on our side, sometimes we have the law on our side, but it's the people power that usually is what's winning these things. Now, with ordinances, we get to write our own rules and play by our own rules, which is really important because then you're not playing by rules that industry wrote to enable them, but you're ratcheting it up and making it more strict so they don't want to play by our rules, which makes it more expensive. And the other aspect is that the legal bills then, if you get an ordinance passed by your local government, then the local government has to defend it. You don't have to have all the bake sales to pay for the lawyers. The local government has to just, if need be, raise their taxes, but they can hopefully have legal liability insurance. And in having that, they don't have to raise taxes or whatever. They have insurance. They'll just kick in, and some law firm will come in and save the day for you. At least that's what happened once with us. So preemption is a very important concept. Preemption is basically where you have a higher level of government saying that a lower level of government can't do something. It's the opposite of what we call a savings clause, which is where it says that more local level of government can do something. So you have a couple levels of this. Sometimes you have federal preemption, like FERC on a lot of natural gas things, or just have federal preemption. So states and local governments just can't do stuff, although there are exceptions to that. There are also state to local preemption issues. So the state has had Act 13 and other laws that say that local governments can't do stuff in Pennsylvania, and other states will have similar stuff. So there are a few types of preemption. You have express preemption. Express is where it says flat out you can't do this. It's just actually written into the law. So that's when it's most clear. Implied, there are two types. Implied is when it's not written into the law. It doesn't say you can't do this, but a court is interpreting it that way. And that's really ugly. It's happened in some cases on environmental issues I've seen in like Rhode Island and New Hampshire, where you had local governments pass laws to say, we don't want this coal plant in Providence or this biomass incinerator in Hopkinton, New Hampshire. We're going to pass a law on it. And the courts are like, the state does such a complete job at regulating this air pollution stuff that, we're just going to consider it that they cover the field. They occupy the field. Therefore, you can't do that stuff. Even though the state law doesn't say you can't, the courts are going to say, we're interpreting it that way, which is just horrible, but sometimes that happens. The other type is conflict preemption. So you can have the court say that your local ordinance can't be enforced at the same time as the state law because there's something that keeps them from both happening and being enforced at the same time. It's an actual direct conflict, and therefore the local one has to go. So sometimes you bump into that. And savings clauses are the good ones that we like. So you can do things. So here are just some examples, just so you get the general idea. There's express preemption on things like pesticide laws at the federal level. The Clean Air Act only on motor vehicles, but on other things it says we can do stuff. The Natural Gas Act, this is where the FERC stuff comes in. So we're talking interstate shipments where the pipelines and compressor stations come in, or import-export terminals for gas. That's where there's preemption. But for other aspects, that's not the case. So for natural gas power plants, you don't have preemption from that. There's also implied preemption where the courts have decided that for hazardous materials transportation or pretty much anything nuclear, the federal government is as far as you can go. There's no right to even have a state be stricter. Now, the good news is that the rest of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the Resource Recovery and Conservation Act, which is about waste laws, solid waste, all say that states can be stricter. Here's some of the ones that say you can be stricter in some areas, not others. So for toxic substances, endangered species, and mining, sometimes you could be stricter. Now, the Clean Air Act is what I've been focusing on. This is the language in the Clean Air Act. This is the savings clause that says that states and local governments can be stricter than federal law. Now, unfortunately, even though it says and their political subdivisions can be stricter, 2 federal circuit courts said, well, it doesn't really mean that. It means it's still up to the state whether your local government can be stricter. So that hasn't always helped everyone. But it does mean that the states can be stricter, and a lot of states are stricter. And in Pennsylvania, we have an explicit thing in our state air pollution control act that says that local governments can be stricter, and so that's what we've been using. This is the court case where it basically says that it's up to the state whether local can be stricter for air. And this is a cool map I made. So when my last semester of law school, I got to figure this out for other states, because I knew about air in Pennsylvania, but I'm like, what about all these other states we're trying to help people in? So I made this map after researching all the stuff, and Tracy helped me. And the green states are the really lucky ones. These are the ones that on air pollution, it says that local governments can be stricter. At the state law says this. The yellow ones are kind of in between, so there are some qualifications on those. The white ones we haven't figured out. The red ones are out of luck. They're the ones that says you can't, that say you can't. And the blue ones are kind of weird and different. I won't get into that, but you can ask me if you're from one of those states. And this is just, if you need the citation, this is in our PowerPoint on our website, so you can get all the specific parts of your state law. This is on solid waste law, so if we're doing things like trying to regulate drill cuttings going to a landfill, in some states you can pass a law that's stricter on solid waste. In Pennsylvania, we're not as sure, and actually I think we might be able to get away with stuff. I still need to research this more. But where we can have stricter laws, like, hey, New York, what do you know? You can have stricter local solid waste laws, and so if drill cuttings are going to a landfill in New York, your local government could probably pass a law and do something about that. So the second of the 3 laws that we've gotten passed so far in Pennsylvania, and all of them have actually been on fighting crematoria. And I actually originally designed them to go after big coal power plant projects. Actually, a coal to oil refinery was one of them. And those governments, we kind of ended up defeating them in a different way, so we didn't need that. But this place that seems to like coal a lot, it's in Northumberland County in northeast Pennsylvania. They were trying to put a crematory in a residential community, pretty much in the backyard of like one of your neighbors. They were going to burn all these bodies. And there are pollution issues with that. And so they found out that we got an ordinance passed in West Reading Borough, right next to Reading in Berks County. And they're like, oh, we want to do that here too. And so I designed a law that basically says that anyone that wants to burn medical waste or bodies has to regulate mercury and dioxin at the local level and has to test for it continuously so we know it's really coming out of your smokestack at all times, report the data to a website real time for the whole world to see, and have really strict emissions limits. And in this case, in their ordinance, they also put a setback distance that we wrote, so it can't be so close to houses. And they got sued in county or state and federal court. It got merged into a federal court case, and we kicked their ass. Not we, but they had legal liability insurance. And so some big firm from near Philadelphia just took it on, wouldn't even talk to me because I wasn't, even though I wrote the thing, they're like, well, you're not involved, so we can't represent you. So they just took it on and they won. So this is basically the strictest air pollution law of a sort in the country, and it has these cool requirements that they attacked with 5 constitutional claims, and on a summary judgment motion, the court just like, you have the right to, the local government has the right to do this, sorry, you're out of luck, and didn't get built there. So one of the other ways of getting these passed, if you don't have people power that can just get your local government to pass something that they hand them, is to go around your local government. And there are not many places that have this in Pennsylvania. There are some, and we've made a map of this if you need to know where you can do this. There's some localities and some counties. But basically, initiative and referendum, they are processes by which you can bring things directly to the people and bypass your local government if you get enough signatures. For example, in Allentown, we worked on this, and Alex and Tracy and I helped gather, and Julie helped gather hundreds and hundreds of signatures. We actually had 3,500 signatures needed to get the 2,000 good ones that were required to get on the ballot with an initiative. An initiative is basically a new idea, whereas a referendum is you're trying to overturn something that the city council or local government did already, and you get the signatures then to put that on the ballot and let the people vote on it. And so we got all the signatures that we needed, and we ended up not going to the ballot for technical, ridiculous stuff that the courts are just dead wrong about, and we've had this aggravating lawsuit over this. The incinerator got defeated anyway, but we're still battling out some of the rights for this. So this is where they're trying to burn trash and sewage sludge in the city. It's in the middle of the Hispanic community. It's pretty bad. So that's why one of the reasons why we're motivated to fight it. It's also near all these things that people care about. Okay, so the creative stuff. There are a lot of different ways you can use the local government to stop a polluter. The most traditional way is to use zoning, and so it can be a setback distance, it can be a stack height requirement, it could be all kinds of things. You have to plant this many trees or whatever. So a lot of things get stopped in that process, but developers are very good at challenging this kind of stuff because they have all this case law and these things that make it easy for them to get around a local government that's trying to be too restrictive in zoning. So sometimes this could be really effective, but sometimes it just doesn't go far enough because they can say, oh, you're trying to ban us from the whole town, you have to let us in somewhere, and then you have that battle. So some other possibilities, there's some places that have done weight limits on roads. If you have a local government owning the road or willing to buy a road back from the state so they have to take care of it, they can set and enforce weight limits so they can't bring in heavy trucks or whatever they need to be able to do to build something. And that's been effective in some cases in stopping things. There's also one of the most creative things, and it's on a natural gas issue, is when they were trying to build the LNG import terminals about a decade ago, there was a proposal, I think it was in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, I think it was Massachusetts, and they had a congressperson who was being very helpful with them. He's like, okay, I got this taken care of, just I can't tell you how yet. And he got a little provision put into a transportation bill in Congress, and it preserved this footbridge that they had to demolish in order to fit the LNG tankers in the water channel to get to the terminal. And so they put in this law, it's just this small amount of money, it's just, oh, you can't tear this footbridge down, and stopped an LNG terminal that way. It's so creative. So so we need to think outside the box and find things like that, because just think more creatively than we're used to, because there are a lot of neat things you could do. So you can also do noise ordinances. Open burning doesn't really apply so much here, but pollution taxes are a possibility you've been looking into. Pennsylvania doesn't look like the laws are set up so well to enable that, but some places it might be a good idea. The stuff we've been doing so far is around continuous monitoring and setting strict air standards. There's some other creative ideas in here as well. I know CELDF, a lot of folks have heard of because they got a lot more ordinances passed. Their ordinances are basically not designed to hold up in court, which is kind of the big difference between what we're doing and what they're doing. However, they're still a good idea if no one challenges them, because any ordinance, it could be blatantly illegal, but if no one challenges it, then it's still legal until they challenge it. So it's worth doing on that basis alone, and because it just has some cool radical stuff in there about corporations not having rights and stuff. Unfortunately, if you pass one of these and you do get challenged, then it's not going to turn out so well. It hasn't usually when it happens. So we have this PowerPoint and other related materials, including whole articles on like the powers of air and local governments to do air and waste laws in different states are up here. And for more information on the continuous monitoring stuff that we've been putting into our ordinances, you can find that here. So I think that's it. Here's my contact info.
Thank you. And I just want to offer one strategy that Energy Justice Network I've been working on. Mike reads my stuff. And how many of you have ever been through an unemployment compensation hearing or applied for unemployment or seen a family member or best friend? How many of you have heard or been living with or have done it yourself, appealed a food stamp determination? How many of you have? So these are all administrative law appeal processes that most regulatory agencies, except in New York, you have to go to court. But a lot of regulatory agencies set these outside appeal processes out to keep it out of court, to keep the state from paying for the expenses of court and doing all these things. So they appoint judges and in unemployment law, that's referees, to hear it outside of court. So it's a quasi-judicial process. In Pennsylvania, we have a board called the Environmental Hearing Board, And any DEP action, even companies can appeal their fines, violations, but we can appeal permits. And so I have a guide called Orange You Appealin', that is a little dated, but it has a little Tropicana orange with the red. If you're online, it's red and white. The drilling rig I found, and my graphic design. It's not exciting. If you open the book, it's actually really difficult to appeal through the Environmental Hearing Board. It should be, you should be aware that if you have a process, a compressor station, like an air quality plan approval or a drilling permit, or a power plant, I've written appeals to the Environmental Hearing Board on compressors, power plants, and well permits. So if you want to do an appeal, the best way to do it is, Sam was saying, is delay it through public comment. Get a committee or a small group of your group. Don't spend all of your group's resources on getting public comments in, but make sure your basic issues are covered, that your objections are stated in a public comment. What you do is, after it's permitted, you have 30 days to file a notice of appeal. It's on the Environmental Hearing Board's website. The instructions are in here. You state your objections. You just number them and say, the valley has cold air, and when the emissions get trapped in the cold air, it'll be even worse air quality on those days. That's one objection. They didn't use their best technologies that they have as an industry. And these are arguments you're going to make to one of 5 judges in Pennsylvania that are appointed to the Environmental Hearing Board. Most of them were appointed before Marcellus Shale was being drilled. So you have potentially sympathetic ears. There's a few of them that are real jerks. They were appointed by Tom Ridge, but the appeal process is best if you have an attorney. There have been many cases, and one, actually, CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, wrote a lot of this. The last half of this guide is Tom Lindsay, the founder of CELDEF's attempts at doing these in the 90s, and I updated it with internet stuff. The pro se appeals, it's called, without an attorney. We have a friend of ours, Debbie Lambert, who now works, if you've heard of her, in a Charlie Spear law firm, who does nuisance lawsuits. That's another, if you can sue for nuisance if you lose and your plant gets built and you want to get compensation for your community to move away or do things like that. She did one of the best pro se appeals in Pennsylvania. There was a hazardous waste incinerator that was going to be burning industrial waste, variety of different kinds, in her community out in Beaver County. And she signed up 25 of the families around her and she took the appeal on their behalf, so she was almost like their representative or attorney. And she was an insurance, what's it called when you, actuary, right? Or she was doing actuarial stuff for insurance companies and selling insurance. And so she was not really experienced, but she was able to get Envirotrol, and the case is Lambert versus Envirotrol, to eliminate a whole bunch of their waste streams that are going to be burned in the plant in a technical settlement. I don't know many cases where appeals are won outright. They take 10 to 12 months through the hearing process and depositions, and you have to hire expert witnesses. But they are great intimidation for the companies because they don't want to go through an obscure quasi-judicial process that takes 12 months, and there's a discovery process, and you have a bunch of angry moms who are going to depose you as a company on their own as pro se. So this is a very threatening thing. And there's a case also in Crawford County. Crawford Area Residents for the Environment put $5,000 together. $10,000, I don't know. They hired an attorney, filed one of these appeals on I think it was the world's largest tire incinerator proposed in Crawford County. And the developer poured a concrete slab to say, all right, I already started construction, and it's still just a concrete slab. He gave up on it. His investors walked away from the project. So for some of these startup companies that were trying to build natural gas power plants, there are only like a few natural gas moguls who made a lot of money doing something in oil and gas, and they decided to team up and make Moxie Energy, which is, if you drive out in Towanda, you can see their new power plant getting built an hour east of here or west of here on 6. If our appeal had been backed up with some litigation resources, unfortunately, not a lot of environmental groups are willing to help. We've been turned down a lot by a lot of groups. It takes a lot of resources, and these often there's nothing technically illegal about the permit, so that's a problem. But if you live in Pennsylvania and you want to know about permit appeals, that's definitely something to include. We're in one for the Milford compressor station now with 8 appellants, and we're going to take it pro se because we don't have an attorney. I got turned down yesterday from another one. But I would say that keep this in your back pocket for when, and threaten the company every chance you get with an appeal, even though you may not be able to follow through. So that's all I have.